We're live.
Okay. I'll call this meeting to order at 6:04. Welcome, everybody, to our second joint meeting with the Exeter West Greenwich School Committee and the West Greenwich and Exeter Town Councils. Before I turn it over to our superintendent, I just want to go over the attendees from the town and the school committee. So we have members Allen, Pasillo, Monroe, McFadden, and Green. We have Superintendent Aronakis, Director of Administration Bob Ross. We have Legal Counsel Andrew Hennius and Director of Technology Jeremy Taylor.
Claudine, Ms. Donovan just joined as well.
Oh, good. And we have Member Donovan. So the whole school committee is present. Okay, thanks, Jim. And let's see, from the West Greenwich Town Council, we have Mark Georgie, Mark Boyer, Lee Kissinger, and we have Town Manager Kevin Breen. And from Exeter Town Council, from what I can gather here, it looks like we have Cal Ellis, Michael Lefebvre, Olivia DeFrancesco, and Maria Lawler. Somebody joined ending in 846, so I don't know who that is. Okay. All right. Just a few housekeeping things. If everyone could keep yourself muted, just so we don't have feedback when Jim's giving his presentation. If you're on the phone, *6, mutes and unmutes. We'll do the same thing we did last time. Jim will give his presentation, and then any comments, questions. I will look for raised hands. So Zoom, you can use your raise hand function. If you're on the phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand. Okay.
Hello, Dan Patterson from Council's here also.
Okay. Dan, are you the 846? Yeah, that's
6846. That's
okay.
Correct.
Jeremy, you want to put a title on Dan? Super.
Dan Patterson, Council President, Exeter Town Council.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, very good. All right, I think we're ready to get started. Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I know that this evening, one of the things that people are looking for is what is the impact on the budget that was adopted by the school committee. I do want to get there, but I think tonight's presentation is really more than just where did we land, but how did we get here? Because I think that based on this presentation, there might be a need for some additional conversation. So let me just review a couple of things really quickly. Just as a reminder, the 2019-20 school budget was $33,387,864. And then in 2020-21, the school committee adopted a budget that was a 1.42% increase, $33,861,958. However, we know that that budget was voted down at the all-day referendum. And as a result of the towns level funding their contribution, we don't have to go through all of that math. We know that we landed on August 11th of 2020 on a budget of $33,136,553, which means that we were operating in the current school year on a budget that's $251,311 less than where it was in the previous year, 2019-20. So that's kind of the history about the last couple of years. The other thing that I did just so that we had everything on the table is for the budget that was approved by the school committee on 8/11, we had the local impacts that were mentioned on that evening. And then the town councils also agreed to share the cost of the SRO outside of the formula calculation. So in essence, for the school department, the town of Exeter was at a $97,354 increase, which includes the SRO funding, and the town of West Greenwich, $62,683, just the SRO portion. Okay, so that's where we were. Now let's go to this year. So I want to walk through the decisions that the school committee made on the night that they adopted the budget. And this will go very quickly. But for the sake of demonstration, we're going to do this a little bit differently tonight. And you can see that, this is pretty close to the starting point that I had reported out at our previous meetings that we had. But part of the reason why it went down a little bit is because I have kept in increase in tuition to our district. So we have had some additional kids that we've confirmed are coming. That's an additional revenue, and it just lowered these numbers a little bit, but it's pretty close to where we said that our starting point was based on the initial list of requests from all of our departments. We have also here included the new population percentages, and that's based on a pretty significant shift to the Exeter and West Greenwich distribution of students. And we talked about that at our last meeting as well. But just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to plug in the percentages as they were last year. Just so that we could see what happens based on the budget that was approved if we were not dealing with the population shift. Again, this is an important distinction. So I just simply plugged in last year's numbers. Prior year, 46.25% Exeter, 53.75% West Greenwich. You can see that based on the initial requests, it automatically brings the percentages down in the fives from where they were. Remember, Exeter at the starting point was 10.0 something percent. We're already at 5.83% without any population shift. But let's see what happens. What I have plugged in at the top is the initial request, and we know that we worked really hard over the last couple of months to move that number down. And what we landed on the February 23rd meeting was 33,701,225. So just at the top of this chart, with our new operations budget that was recommended and approved, it represents a 1.7% increase over the FY21, the current year's budget. It is a 0.94% increase over the FY20 budget, because remember the FY20 budget was a little bit higher than the FY21 budget. And it's actually a reduction of just about 0.5% from the original approved FY21 budget that was voted down by at the all-day referendum. So, so the percent increase is pretty small. And let's just take a look at what that does to the numbers. So again, based on where we currently are for the operations budget, if the population didn't shift, we're at 2.42% for Exeter, 2.25% for West Greenwich. On top of that, the school committee also added in some revenue, 164,948, which is revenue to offset some of the post-employment benefits. Again, that's something that we've talked about at our prior meeting. And again, I just want to show what happens to the numbers. So with the new operating budget, 33,701,225, with the added revenue for the other post-employment benefits to offset the cost of those, with the increase in the CTE tuition, and again, with no population shift, we would be looking at a budget that called for a 1.8% increase to Exeter and 1.63% increase to West Greenwich. I think at that point, the numbers seem fairly reasonable. However, the school committee also voted to assign from their fund balance an amount of $250,000. That was a conversation that we've had in the past. It's a tricky conversation. It means that we're creating a structural deficit in order to offset the costs, but I wanted to include everything that the school committee did. And that would mean that without a population shift, we'd be looking at a 0.87% increase for Exeter and a 0.7% increase for West Greenwich. So even though the amount of the request for the operating budget went up, so did the revenue side, and therefore the impact on the towns is pretty minimal. 107,000 for Exeter, 108,000 for Exeter, 101,000 roughly for West Greenwich. Again, that's without a population shift. The reason I am demonstrating this is because I think that for the purposes of tonight's conversation, we need to distinguish between whether or not the budget is reasonable, or if people are having a difficult time with the way that the population distribution is calculated. And obviously we know that when I plug in the population shift, we're going to see that these numbers will significantly change. But I wanted to highlight the fact that the real issue is not the budget. The real issue, the reason why one town is being impacted more significantly than the other is because the charter defines how population shift is calculated. And so this year we know that Exeter went from 46.25% to 48.10% based on the shift in population. And West Greenwich went from 53.75 to 51.90. So we're going from a percent increase of less than 1% for each town to an almost 5% increase for Exeter and a decrease of 2.77% for West Greenwich. This is the budget as it was approved by the school committee at its last meeting. Again, I think it was important to show with the new operations budget, which is a 1.7% increase over the prior year and just a 0.94% increase over FY20, with the revenues that were added to the budget, without a population shift, we would have no issue at all, less than 1% in each town. With the population shift, almost 5% in Exeter. This is a hard number to look at, which is why the school committee kept looking at potential additional revenues to continue to lower that expense. But this is where we landed. Again, no issue except population shift. So I want to also show you what happens if the budget fails, just so that we understand what the potential is. Obviously, if the budget passes, those are the percentages. That becomes the operating budget. These are the impact numbers for the towns. Exeter would go up $608,209. West Greenwich would go down $399,240. We know that at least a portion of the population shift is related to the pandemic. I went through those numbers at the last meeting. The total increase to the two towns is $208,969, which is a 0.78% increase. The problem is that it is distributed in a really uneven way based on the shift of population. So if we just looked at all the towns put together, it's a 0.7% increase to the taxpayers. It's distributed as 4.9% increase to Exeter, 2.77% decrease to West Greenwich for a combined 0.78% increase. So again, the overall budget increase is low. The impact on the two towns is significant population shift. So let's see what happens if this budget fails, we go to the all-day referendum, it fails, and we follow the exact same steps that we followed for the current budget, the current school year budget, FY21. So if the budget fails on April 12th, we would revert back to a level funded contribution. And the level funded contribution would be from last year, 26,704,936. So I had to work this backwards. 26,704,936. The new population shift adjustments are included here. And when you multiply the percentage times the total local impact, because if we're level funding contribution, that's what it would be, then Exeter would go up $510,077. West Greenwich would go down $510,077. And again, that's because of the population shift. And the percent change would be 3.75% and negative 3.74%. The other thing that we did for this current year is we took the SRO out of the budget, because in order for me to get to the contribution of 26,704,936, we need to make some reductions. And right now, obviously, if we add these two numbers together, that adds up to more than 26,704,936. So in order for us to get here, we would have to reduce the request from the operating budget. We had the same issue in the current school year. One of the things we did is we removed the SRO from the calculation. So again, I'm just assuming that we do exactly the same thing that we did in this current school year. Cost of the SRO, $122,498. So I removed that from the $33,701,225, which is what the school committee has approved. That would bring us to $33,578,727. I still included the assignments of revenue that the school committee voted on. I still included the added revenues. And when I do the addition, I am still $211,000 over the amount that we would need to hit the equitable contribution from the prior year. So I haven't made any cuts, but we would have to cut an additional $211,837 just to get us to a place where these two numbers added up to the equal local contribution. If the towns agreed to share the SRO like they did in the prior year, it would add half the cost, $61,249, to both towns. It's half of that amount. And so Exeter, based on the population shift, would be looking at a $571,326 increase. West Greenwich would be looking at a $448,828 increase. Exeter would be at a 4.61% increase. West Greenwich would be at negative 3.11. So the reason I'm showing this is that even if the budget gets voted down, and if we follow the exact same steps that the two towns followed in the previous year, where there was a very, very small population shift, we are still looking at an Exeter increase, even if the budget gets voted down, of 4.61% compared to 4.91%. And I know that everybody looks at the number and says, how do we get down to 4? I know we have members of the school committee that voted against the budget because we didn't get to 4, but I can't get there based on the population shift. without lowering the budget to even less than what it was this year, which was already less than what it was in the prior year. I can't do it. The issue that we have is there is a massive shift in population. And whether we vote the budget in or vote the budget down, the impact is still going to be greater than 4% in Exeter because of this issue, not because of the budget that's been requested. And then the last, and by the way, this happens, and I still have to make $211,000 plus worth of cuts, which I have not identified. So the last thing that I want to show you is what would the difference be in this year for this particular budget season? What would the difference be between passing the budget or the budget failing at the all-day referendum? Again, assuming that the towns took the exact same steps they took in the current year. The difference for Exeter is that we're talking about a $36,883 difference between voting it in and voting it down, because all of it is attributed to the population shift. And the difference for West Greenwich is that there would be a $49,588 reduction. So it would be a little bit less, but not that much. The total difference when you combine the two towns between voting it in and voting it down is $86,471. And on top of that, it would require an additional $212,000 worth of cuts. So the reason I wanted to demonstrate this is that we are all between a rock and a hard place. And it is because we are experiencing a massive shift in population, and our charter specifically defines how the shift in population is handled. And it doesn't make any special accommodations for shifts in population due to, for example, the pandemic, which we know has impacted the shift at least partially. So if I follow the charter, whether we vote it in or vote it down, it is not making a massive difference between the two. The budget itself represents a very small increase over the prior year, despite the fact that we were reduced from the year prior to that. And without the shift in population, we'd be looking at a roughly 0.8% increase to each town, which is very insignificant, especially as compared to what I'm seeing other budgets in school districts around us being approved at and posted in the newspaper. I think we've been really, really, really responsible here. We've been very thorough in our review, and we know that our budget is tight, but it works. I don't know how else to manage this issue. And so I wanted to share it with you because maybe this becomes the time where we can engage in a conversation about if the real issue is about how we distribute the cost based on population, maybe it's time we have a conversation about the real issue, which is not my budget. It's the way the populations are shared between the two towns. Currently, that is defined in the charter. It's been a topic of conversation in the past. Do we move to 50-50? I've heard individuals talk about potentially moving to a multi-year average, because we've already analyzed that. Actually, Mr. Ross has analyzed that. And we know what happens. In 1 year, the population of one town goes way up, and pretty much on a consistent basis, the following year, the population drops back down. So a town will see a massive spike, and then it will see a massive decrease. And if you average out multiple years, it really kind of smooths the level of increases and decreases to the point where each town can manage those increases and decreases without looking at a budget like this, which seems pretty responsible. But then when you build in the spike, there's nothing I can do to get a town down to the 4% mark. We've experienced this before. We've had the conversations. I know this is upsetting to people. I know they don't like to see the number where it is, but I wanted to show you that it really has to do with the way the charter is written. It does not have to do with the budget as I've presented. So I thought it was important for me to say that and to show you the numbers and open up the floor for some conversation about what our next steps could possibly be.
Jim, before I acknowledge people, can you just show the spreadsheet as to, for the school committee approved budget for this year, just so we end with where we're at?
Sure thing.
Thanks.
Okay, so the school committee approved budget is here. I have it highlighted. So the operating budget, 33,701,225. The local impact is 27,039,271, which represents a total increase from the prior year of 208,969 in local contributions, $208,969 in local contributions. However, that 208,969 is a $608,209 increase to Exeter, offset by a $399,240 decrease to West Greenwich. The total differential is 208,969. Exeter, 4.91% increase. West Greenwich, 2.77% decrease. Putting them all together, the local contribution is a 0.78% increase over the prior year, which again seems pretty low, but the way that it's distributed is problematic. So I think people that are upset about the budget, I want to make sure that we're upset about the right thing. And if a change is going to happen, that's where we should be discussing the change. And the way to do that is to look at the way it's written in the charter and make recommendations about the way that that language is written. And if we don't make a change, then year after year, based on the way the population shifts, we could be experiencing similar issues. But I know, looking at a multi-year trend report, that if we did, say, a 5-year average, which is, I think, how Bob modeled it out, the increases or decreases on an annual basis based on a prior 5-year average are at max like 0.4%. Because every time there's a massive spike, the town sees a significant decrease the following year or the year after. When you average it out over time, it really smooths out the graph, and no town, Exeter or West Greenwich, would potentially be looking at spikes or decreases as massive as this going forward. It still equals out to the same amount over time, but it equalizes it out on an annual year-to-year basis. So, I've heard a lot of people talking about how this budget is problematic. I can't do anything more to the budget, but if this is the problem that people want to talk about, I think it's imperative for me to at least put it on the table. But this is the budget as it was approved by the school committee.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to acknowledge people by when I saw their hands up. So, Member McFadden, go ahead.
So I listened. I didn't watch because I'm on voice only. I wouldn't call it so much a population shift as much as it was a population drop. So we had a significant drop in population overall to the district of about, and I'm guessing what the paper says, 117 kids from last year. And a lot of those, a significant percentage of that drop, and I'm not even sure that number, I'm just looking at it real quick. But I know that a significant disproportional population drop occurred on the West Greenwich side. So if I were to look at, so drop versus shift, as a result of the significant drop in population on the West Greenwich side, the shift of cost moved over to Exeter. So I understand it's just words, but just remember it was a population shift. I mean, it was a population drop. Significant portion of that drop occurred on the West Greenwich side. Will it bounce back? I'm not a soothsayer, so I'm not going to suggest anything, but I tend to want to live in the fiscal year that we're trying to create a dialogue. As far as these dragon tooth type of budget situations that we've seen over the last few years, which is a result of even a small change in population and the lodge costs associated with a single student, you get these dragon tooth things. That's a good idea, Bob. Any idea where you got that child averaging? Anyway, but I think that I would be in favor of a running average over, say, 5 years. I don't know if it requires a charter change, but because the charter says you will use the kid count, as I call it, from October 1st, but it doesn't say in what context you can use the kid count. So it's a question of whether it demands a charter change. In the strictest sense of the word, maybe it does, but it doesn't say how it's to be used. So if you were to average the kid count by town over 5 years, you would get rid of these dragon tooth situations where it goes up severely one year, goes down severely the next year. It all levels out. It's a good concept. I'm not in favor of the 50-50 proposition for reasons that we have gone over in the past. I don't know if it's entirely in this. It just doesn't seem to work for Exeter. The other proposition that was talked about was a ability to pay. So there's the use tax, right, which I think is the concept that most municipalities are aware of. The use tax is the kid count, and then there's ability to pay. And ability to pay is the tax rate comes out of the school department. I'll tell you right now, that won't be too popular for West Greenwich because your taxes would go up about 45% because West Greenwich has the good fortune of a $500 million commercial base to Exeter's $45 million. So the ability to pay, which is basically the tax rate is developed and sent out equally to both towns. So from a tax rate perspective, right, it's absolutely fair, but it's not necessarily, I think, the way West Greenwich wants to go, in all honesty, because, like I said, they have so much more in commercial property to Exeter that their load on the school would probably go up 45%, and I don't think that's a viable solution for West Greenwich. So 50-50, I don't think that's too viable. I don't think the ability to pay is viable. I think that averaging over 5 years, that I think Bob is working on, that would get rid of these dragon tooth situations, would probably be most viable. Again, I don't know if that demands charter change. The other thing is we are seeing a significant depletion in population. How much of those 117 kids come back next year remains to be seen. We do have a lot of educators in our staff. We have 160 educators. That's below 10-1. But that's what was reported out by the district to the Rhode Island School Committees Association. That doesn't mean that's real today, but that's what they reported out, and so that's the number I'm going to choke. So we have a lot of things going on right now. I think our contracts are a little too rich. I think we saw about $2 million in additional costs associated with our contracts. I particularly don't like the clause where we give a bonus to educational staffers if they keep a low absenteeism. I don't think the people in Exeter were strained to meet their tax bill every year, largely because the school department is a heavy burden on them, would be pleased to know about that particular clause that was adopted in the last contract negotiation period. But it's there. I didn't vote for it, but nevertheless, there it is. But to summarize, I think that I'd like to say that I like the average kid count over 5 years, which is basically average the kids out of 5 years, and you wouldn't use the real absolute value in a particular year, but rather you would use the average over 5 years. And then when the sixth year comes along, the oldest number drops off, and then you're averaging the next 5 years. And again, you're using the average number kid count for that particular town. So you average both towns, but the town bill would be based on their average number for Exeter, and then the average number for West Greenwich, and the bill would be based on the two numbers added together, divided into the total budget, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that I've said a lot. That's a lot to absorb, but there you go. I think I'm done for now. Thank you.
Just a couple of very quick things. We did experience a population drop this year. I know I addressed that the last time we were together. Every school district in the state of Rhode Island experienced a population drop this year. We had a number of families that moved to homeschooling. Mr. McFadden is right. We need to wait to see how many of the kids that move to homeschooling return for next year. In fact, that's my alarm. Okay, I'm good now. We've already seen some of those children that signed up for homeschooling at the start of the year begin to come back already based on where we are with the pandemic and the numbers. That's already beginning to happen. But another big component of the drop, it's not just the homeschool kids. As I reported the last meeting, a number of children in the preschool and kindergarten, which are your non-compulsory grades, and this happened consistently across the state, every school district, a number of those kids did not enroll because it's non-compulsory. Parents were worried, start of the school year. Our numbers in preschool and kindergarten have dropped significantly. And that's where we looked at prior years, 5-10 years prior, and the numbers went down. We know that once we return to normal, those numbers will go back up. And we also showed that historically, the numbers in preschool and kindergarten are very heavily weighted in the West Greenwich area. And that's because the preschool itself is located in West Greenwich, and a lot of the Exeter residents use different preschools than our public preschool. So it's kind of a combination of all of those things. Yes, it's a decrease that results in a shift in the percentages because the percentages still have to add up to 100. And so you're right, we did experience a decrease. We expect many of those children to return next year, but the percentage still has to add up to 100.
Okay, let's see. Lee Kisner.
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to say I've been sitting through all these meetings, and I know that the school administration and the school committee have worked very hard to get the budget down as much as they possibly can. The only concern that I have about the current budget is the structural deficit. That's also a gamble, and it's something that you guys have to address, and you've got to take that risk, I guess, because if things don't work the way you're planning on them, next year we start $250,000 in the hole right out of the gate. So, and I know the auditors aren't going to like it, so I'm just pointing that out. Other than that, you guys have done a nice job. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Lee.
I agree with you. I think, you served on the school committee. We've had these conversations before when we've put money in from unassigned fund balance. I don't like it. I know you don't like it. I know members of the school committee don't like it. It does create a structural deficit. But for this year, you know, that I thought it was my responsibility to throw out a lot of different ideas, and I did. They weren't really popular. So the only alternative, you know, I had some ideas about, you know, how we kind of balance it out as a one-time thing. It wasn't a popular idea, so we didn't go with it. But in order to bring the Exeter side down as much as possible, because, you know, we represent both towns. It's a tough year for a lot of families. A lot of families are going through stuff, you know, based on the economy, based on the pandemic. And you know, I think the school committee felt that they needed to do as much as possible to lower the impact on both towns. But obviously with a focus on Exeter because of the shift, that's what we did. West Greenwich benefits from it. But I don't know what the answer is. Right? It's the population shift that is killing us this year.
Yep, understood. All right, question was asked. Are you guys getting any federal money in this coming year that you're aware of with this new 1.9 trillion that's hopefully going to be released?
Yeah, so we haven't even gotten the stimulus money from the last batch of funds that were approved. I know approximately what we're getting, but none of that money is allowable for expenses that for expenses that have been funded out of local budgets before, right? You can't supplant expenses that you are required to pay for, or things that you've paid for in the past out of local dollars. We haven't added anything into this budget for us to apply that money to. It needs to be for programs and supports for kids that address academic and social emotional needs, and losses that they've experienced, academic losses, social emotional issues that are the result of a year and 3 months worth of instruction in a less than ideal environment. You know, we have 3 months worth of no kids going to school at the end of last year. We did a really good job. It is not the same as face-to-face instruction in front of a teacher on a day-to-day basis. A lot of kids this year that are on full distance learning. They've had no face-to-face interaction with teachers this year. We're worried about those kids. Junior and senior high school is on a hybrid. They're only getting 2 or 3 days a week of face-to-face instruction. Like it's not the same. And there are things that we're going to need to do to address those needs and bring the kids back to where they should be and beyond. The money that we're getting from federal is to address those things. And that's going to be specifically defined in the grant that we get, that we have to apply for. We have not heard anything about the 1.9 trillion. I keep getting some mixed messages about whether or not, and I think the 1.9 trillion includes money that goes to the towns, to the municipals to address need. And that might be a way for Exeter to offset the increase that they're experiencing this year, because I have the data already to prove that part of the reason for the increase is a reduction in the student population, at least in kindergarten and preschool, that we can tie back to the pandemic, that kids did not register, parents did not register their kids. And maybe that's a way to plug the hole, but I don't have any of the specific language on the 1.9 trillion yet, but it should stay on our radar, because it could be a possibility, not necessarily for the town, for the school department to close the gap, but maybe for the town to close the gap that they're experiencing as a result of where the budget landed.
Okay, that makes sense. And one last question while I have the floor. When do you think all the students will be back in school? We're getting quizzed from the parents and the taxpayers as to, you know, they want the kids back in school.
I know. So you know that we've had the opportunity for full 5-day a week in-person preschool through grade 6 since the start of the school year. That has not changed. The week prior to February vacation, we welcomed back all of our 7th graders So they were on a hybrid model, 2 or 3 days a week. The week before February vacation, we invited them back 5 days a week of in-person. The week we returned from February vacation, we brought back 8th graders. And again, we still have some families that have chosen full distance, and we have some families that are opting to stay in hybrid, but a lot of the kids came back, grade 7 and grade 8. We are beginning the conversation about high school. There's still a lot for us to work out. High school is the most difficult because the kids don't stay in stable groups the whole day. But the families are aware that we're having the conversation. I did send out a communication to all members of the school community last week. The high school administrators and I held a parent community forum virtually last night. Any parent that wanted to come on to hear what we're thinking about, what our current status is, information that we need from them. We had that meeting last night. We're surveying the families right now. Those surveys went out today. We've met with the faculty to talk through some of their concerns. So we're actually moving in the direction. We haven't made up our mind yet because this happened last night with the wind. For some strange reason, it'll go off. Okay.
Does the fact that the junior high and the senior high are in the same building, does that play into the equation as well a little bit?
It does in terms of busing. You know, we brought 7th and 8th graders back. The majority of those kids need to get on the buses. With the 7th and 8th graders back, our buses are good. We start bringing back 9th graders and 10th graders. Now we have to relook at bus routes. That's one of the variables. So in order for us to do that, we need to know how many children, if they decided to come back, would require a bus. You know, there's just a lot behind the scenes. But right now in our district, as of last week, we have full in-person preschool through 8 and 9th through 12th graders, and their families are engaged in conversations. We had a community forum last night. Surveys went out to students and parents today. So we're working on it.
Thank you.
And we are one of very few school districts that are working on that at this point.
Understood.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, I do not see any other hands up. Are there any other questions or comments?
I mean, other than Mr. McFadden, is there any response to the question about having a discussion? Because otherwise, this issue could come up year after year, and you know, it feels pretty bad when I present a budget that I've presented and it gets voted down because people want to see the number go down below 4. And I can't do it because of a variable that I can't control. I mean, I'll do whatever I need to do, but that, you know, if this is the year to put the question on the table.
West Greenwich is open to the discussion.
Are you there, Jim?
Yes.
The 5-year averaging, I'm open to investigating it and see where it goes. Like Paul says, it doesn't hurt, so we can probably start some dialogue on that.
So what we can do is we can put it on the next school committee agenda. So the process, the school committee would need to vote on opening up a charter review committee on that topic, and then we can look into putting together the committee and get the dialogue started. So we can
charter review committee. I'm gonna go. Thank you.
Okay. So Jim, let's put that. Let's put that on the next agenda.
Yeah, will do. I appreciate it.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. Anyone else? Good. Okay. All right. I just like to end the meeting, not going over anything that Jim presented. He presented a well thought out process that we went through. Jim continues to be a magician. I know every year I say, I don't know how you can do it this year, and he does it. So, but I do want to say to the town councils that I'm confident that we're submitting a fiscally responsible budget to the taxpayers at the all-day referendum. And I hope that we can get the support from both town councils for the 21-22 budget. And with that, I think that we can call the meeting to an end. I don't see any other hands, any other comments that want to be made. Jimmy, you're good?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. So if we can have a motion to adjourn.
Donovan, so
Donovan moves. Do we have a second?
Second.
Member Pasillo seconded. I'll take a roll call vote. Member Donovan,
Donovan, aye.
Member Green,
Aye.
Member Allen,
Aye.
Member McFadden,
Aye.
Member Pasillo,
Aye.
Member Monroe.
Aye.
Okay, and I'm an aye. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.